They all froze when I placed the folder on the mahogany table. My mother's smirk vanished mid-sentence. "The black sheep has arrived," she had just announced to the entire family, unaware that this sheep had been quietly building an empire. The sound of 20 forks dropping at once was almost musical. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I hadn't stepped foot in my childhood home for 7 years. 7 years of silence, of rebuilding, of transforming myself from the person they thought I was into the person I knew I could be. As I pulled into the circular driveway, the memory of the last time I left this place washed over me, tears streaming down my face, my mother's final words ringing in my ears. "You'll amount to nothing without this family." The Parker family. Estate loomed before me, its pristine colonial architecture gleaming in the afternoon sun. The perfectly manicured lawn, the symmetrical rows of hydrangeas, the massive oak trees flanking the entrance. Everything was exactly as I remembered. It, perfect on the outside, rotting from within. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. Olivia Parker, 32, CEO of Horizon Technologies. No longer the rebellious teenager who stormed out after being told to get in line or get out. My charcoal, gray suit was tailored to perfection. My hair swept into a sleek bun, my expression carefully cultivated to reveal nothing. I hadn't come to make peace, I'd come to make a point. The annual Parker family reunion, a tradition as old as the money that filled their bank accounts. Every year, the extended family gathered to celebrate their collective success, to forge new business alliances, and to remind each other why the Parker name was synonymous with power in this part of Connecticut. Every year, my mother, Victoria Parker, took center stage, orchestrating the event with military precision and thinly veiled tyranny. And every year since I left, according to my younger sister Emma, my mother had used my absence as a cautionary tale. "Let me tell you about Olivia Parker," she'd say over cocktails, her voice dripping with theatrical disappointment. The black sheep who thought she knew better than generations of Parker wisdom. I stepped out of my car, ignoring the curious stares from the valet attendants who clearly didn't recognize me. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks ago, the first in 7 years. A cream-colored envelope with the Parker family crest, addressed in my mother's unmistakable handwriting. Inside, a single line beneath the formal invitation. "It's time to come home, Olivia." I almost threw it away. Almost. But something stopped me. Perhaps it was the memory of my father's face the day I left, torn between loyalty to his wife and love for his daughter. Perhaps it was the knowledge that my grandmother, the only person who ever truly believed in me, was turning 90 this year. Or perhaps it was simply that I was finally ready to show them exactly who Olivia Parker had become. The massive front door opened before I could knock. Stevens, our family butler since before I was born, stood there, his usually impassive face betraying a flicker of surprise. "Miss Olivia," he said, bowing slightly. "Welcome home." Home. The word felt foreign, incorrect. This house hadn't been my home since the day my mother found my college application to MIT instead of the legacy admission to Princeton she'd arranged. "Thank you, Stevens," I replied, stepping into the grand foyer. The familiar scent of lemon, polish, and old money enveloped me. "Is everyone here?" "In the main dining room," he confirmed. "Lunch is about to be served." Perfect timing. Mother always said entrances were everything. I could hear the din of conversation as I approached the dining room, the familiar cadence of Parker family discussion, assertive, competitive, each voice struggling to dominate. I paused at the doorway, taking in the scene before me. 25 people seated around the enormous mahogany table that had witnessed generations of Parker triumphs and betrayals. My mother at the head, of course, resplendent in a navy blue dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. Next to her, my father, grayer now, His once commanding presence diminished somewhat by time and my mother's ever-expanding shadow. My sister Emma, her husband Bradley, their two perfect children, Uncle Richard and his third wife, cousins, second cousins, distinguished family friends, all of them bathed in the warm light streaming through the wall of windows that overlooked the immaculate gardens. All of them part of the world I had rejected, or that had rejected me. I took a deep breath and stepped into the room. The conversation didn't stop all at once. It died in concentric circles from the point where my mother sat. Her eyes found me first, widening slightly before narrowing into the appraising look I knew all too well, the one that catalogued imperfections, weaknesses, ammunition for later. "Olivia," she said, her voice carrying effortlessly across the room. What a surprise. A lie. She had invited me. But of course, in Victoria Parker's world, narrative was more important than truth. "Mother," I replied, keeping my voice even. "You look well." The room had fallen completely silent now. 25 pairs of eyes assessed me, searching for signs of failure, for confirmation of the story they'd been told about poor, wayward Olivia, who couldn't cut it in the real world. What they saw instead was a woman in a $5,000 suit, wearing a watch that cost more than some of their cars, radiating the quiet confidence that comes from building something with your own hands. "Well," my mother said after a moment, recovering her composure, "I suppose we should set another place." "No need to trouble yourself," I replied. "I can see you're surprised by my arrival despite the invitation. I wouldn't want to disrupt your carefully planned seating arrangement." A flash of irritation crossed her face. The invitation had been a test, a gambit. She hadn't expected me to actually show up. "Nonsense," she said with a practiced smile. "Family is always welcome at this table. Isn't that right, Charles?" She turned to my father, who had risen from his seat, uncertainty written across his features. "Olivia," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's good to see you." I allowed my expression to soften slightly. "You too, Dad." Stevens appeared, at my side with a chair, silently placing it at the opposite end of the table from my mother, the only available space. Symbolic, of course. Everything in this house was. "The prodigal daughter returns," Uncle Richard commented as I took my seat, his attempt at humor falling flat in the tense atmosphere. My mother's smile tightened. "Perhaps not prodigal, Richard. Let's not give her more credit than she deserves." She turned to address the table at large. For those who may not be familiar with my eldest daughter's story, Olivia decided 7 years ago that the opportunities presented by the Parker family weren't sufficient for her ambitions. Here it comes, I thought. The narrative she had undoubtedly perfected over years of my absence. She rejected Princeton, a university that has educated Parkers for 4 generations, in favor of MIT. She said the name like it was a community college, not one of the most prestigious technical universities in the world. And when we expressed concern about this decision, she cut ties with the family entirely. Murmurs around the table, disapproving glances. "The black sheep has arrived," my mother concluded with a theatrical sigh, raising her wine glass in a mock toast. That's when I placed the folder on the table. The sound it made was insignificant, just a soft thud against the polished wood. But the effect was immediate. 20 pairs of eyes shifted from my face to the nondescript manila folder in front. Of me. "What's that?" my mother asked, her tone suggesting both disinterest and wariness. I smiled. Not the practiced Parker smile designed to disarm without revealing. A real smile, the kind that comes from knowing exactly what you're about to do. "My net worth statement," I replied simply. "Since we're catching up on the last 7 years." The silence in the room deepened. My father leaned forward slightly. Emma, my sister, stopped with her fork halfway to her mouth. "Really, Olivia?" my mother said with a dismissive wave. This is hardly the time or place for such crude discussions of money. This, from a woman who had spent my entire childhood comparing our wealth to that of other families, calculating the precise value of every connection, every marriage, every business deal. I disagree, I said calmly. This is the Parker family reunion, and the Parkers, as you've reminded me countless times, are defined by their success. I leaned back in my chair. I'm simply providing an update on mine. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. If you've managed to find stable employment, that's wonderful. But there's no need to open it, I interrupted, something I had never dared to do in this house. Unless you're not interested in how the black sheep has been spending her time. A challenge. Direct, unavoidable. Every Parker in the room recognized it for what it was. And no Parker could ever back down from a challenge, my mother least of all. With deliberate slowness, she nodded to Stevens, who moved to collect the folder and bring it to her. The room remained eerily silent as she opened it, her expression carefully controlled. I watched her eyes scan the first page, watched as they widened, then narrowed, watched as she flipped to the second page, then the third, watched as the color drained slowly from her face. This is, she began, then stopped. Accurate, I finished for her, down to the last decimal place. My father leaned over to look at the papers, his expression shifting from curiosity to shock. Olivia, he said quietly, is this real? Every digit, I confirmed. Horizon. Technologies. Perhaps you've heard of it? We went public last year. Of course they had heard of it. Horizon had been on the cover of Forbes twice in the past year. Our innovative work in sustainable energy storage had revolutionized the industry, attracting investors from around the world. What they hadn't known, what I had carefully kept out of the press, was that the O. Parker, listed as founder and CEO, was the same Olivia Parker who had stormed out of this house 7 years ago. You're the founder of Horizon? This, from my cousin James, whose private equity firm had actually tried to arrange a meeting with Horizon's elusive CEO just months ago. I had declined through intermediaries. I nodded. Founder and CEO. The sound of 20 forks dropping at once was almost musical. But that's a multi-billion-dollar company, Uncle Richard spluttered, wine sloshing in his glass. $4.3 billion, as of market close yesterday, I confirmed. Though, of course, my personal net worth is somewhat less. The details are all there in the statement. My mother still hadn't spoken. She was staring at the papers in front of her perfectly manicured finger tracing the numbers as if searching for a mistake, a deception. Anything that would restore the narrative she had constructed. This is impossible, she finally said, but her voice lacked conviction. I raised an eyebrow. Is it? Wasn't it you who always said Parkers are destined for extraordinary things? But you left, without connections, without support, without you, I finished for her. Yes, that was rather the point. The room seemed to hold its breath. In Parker family gatherings, direct confrontation was unusual. Conflicts were handled through subtle barbs, strategic alliances, quiet exclusions, never through open challenge. I think, my father said carefully, breaking the tension, that we should all congratulate Olivia on her remarkable success. A murmur of agreement rippled through the table, more stunned than sincere. My mother closed the folder with a snap. Yes, well, success comes in many forms, doesn't it? Financial achievement is just one measure. Typical Victoria Parker. When confronted with an inconvenient truth, shift the metrics. You're absolutely right, Mother, I said, surprising her with my agreement. Which is why I've also included our company's impact report. 5,000 jobs created, $300 million invested in renewable energy research. Scholarship programs that have sent over 200 underprivileged students to universities, including Princeton, I added, with a smile. Someone at the far end of the table let out a low whistle. My mother's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. For the first time in my memory, Victoria Parker was speechless. The narrative she had carefully crafted about her failed daughter, the cautionary tale she had used to keep the rest of the family in line, had just crumbled before her eyes. "Now," I said, rising from my chair, "if you'll excuse me, I need to say hello to grandmother. I hear she's turning 90 this year." "Olivia," my father called as I turned to leave. "Will you be staying for the weekend?" I paused at the doorway, feeling the weight of every gaze in the room. 7 years ago, I had left this house convinced I would never return. 7 years of building, grinding, proving to myself that I was more than just a Parker, that I could create something meaningful on my own terms. I hadn't come for reconciliation. I had come to make a point, but looking at my father's face, seeing the pride there that he had never been able to express against my mother's disapproval, I felt something unexpected. Not forgiveness, exactly, but perhaps the beginning of a new chapter. "I might," I said, finally. "I have some business to discuss with James, actually." I nodded toward my cousin, whose eyes widened with sudden understanding and opportunity. "His firm has been trying to get a meeting with me for months." A ripple of surprised laughter broke the tension. Even my mother's lips twitched slightly. As I walked out, I heard the conversation resume behind me, urgent and animated. The story of Olivia Parker was being rewritten in real time, spreading through the family like wildfire. By dinner, everyone would have an opinion, a retrospective insight, perhaps even a revisionist memory of how they had always seen my potential. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that I had reclaimed my narrative, on my terms. The black sheep had not only survived outside the flock, she had thrived. And that changed everything. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The Parker family estate had dozens of rooms, but I knew exactly where to find my grandmother. The solarium at the east wing had always been her sanctuary, a glass-enclosed garden where exotic plants thrived under her attentive care, much like how she had nurtured the potential she saw in me when no one else did. As I approached the familiar glass doors, memories washed over me. This room had been my refuge, too, once upon a time. A place where expectations loosened their grip, where failure wasn't a catastrophe but a lesson, where dreams were encouraged, rather than measured for their practical value. I paused at the entrance, watching her. Eleanor Parker, matriarch of the family, sat in her favorite wicker chair surrounded by blooming orchids and trailing vines. At almost 90, she remained regal, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, her posture perfect, her hands steady as she carefully pruned a delicate plant. The years had softened her features but had done nothing to dim the sharp intelligence in her eyes. She looked up, and a smile transformed her face. "I was wondering when you'd find your way here," she said, setting aside her gardening tools. I heard there was quite a commotion in the dining room. Of course she had. In the Parker household, news, especially scandalous news, traveled at the speed of light. "Hello, Gran," I said, crossing the room to kiss her cheek. The familiar scent of gardenia perfume enveloped me, instantly transporting me back to childhood moments of comfort and wisdom. 7 years, she remarked, patting the chair beside her. "Too long, Olivia." "I know." I sat down, suddenly feeling like the uncertain 25-year-old who had left rather than the accomplished CEO who had returned. But it was necessary. Was it? She studied my face with eyes that missed nothing. Or was it easier? I hadn't expected that, even from her. "Easier?" I repeated, a hint of defensiveness creeping into my voice. "Building a company from nothing? working 18-hour days for years, living in a studio apartment the size of mother's closet while reinvesting every penny into the business? That was the easy choice? My grandmother's expression remained serene. Easier than staying and fighting for your place here. Easier than trying to change minds rather than simply proving them wrong. Easier emotionally, dear one, not practically. Her words hit with precision, as they always had. Eleanor Parker. Never raised her voice, never needed to. Her quiet observations carried more weight than my mother's theatrical proclamations ever could. Maybe you're right, I admitted after a moment, but I don't regret it. Nor should you. She reached out to take my hand, her skin papery but her grip still strong. What you've built is remarkable, Olivia. I've followed your journey, you know. I looked at her in surprise. You have? She smiled, a hint of mischief in her eyes. Did you think I was completely dependent on Victoria's carefully curated family updates? I may be old, but I know how to use the internet, and I have friends in interesting places. She paused. I've owned stock in Horizon Technologies since your first public offering. I stared at her, speechless for a moment, then laughed. You're full of surprises, Gran. As are you. 4 billion, is it? When I nodded, she shook her head in wonder. And to think Victoria was convinced you'd come crawling back within 6 months. The mention of my mother sobered me. She's not taking it well. She's recalibrating, my grandmother corrected. Victoria's greatest talent has always been adapting the narrative to maintain her position. By dinner, she'll have convinced herself she always knew you had extraordinary potential. By tomorrow, she'll be implying she deliberately pushed you out to force you to prove yourself. The accuracy of this prediction made me both laugh and sigh. Some things never change. People rarely do at their core, she agreed. The question is, what will you do now? You've made your point. Rather spectacularly, I might add. Is that all you came for? Was it? I had spent years fantasizing about this moment, returning triumphant, seeing the shock on their faces, especially my mother's. In my darkest, most exhausted moments during those early startup days, the thought of eventually proving everyone wrong had sometimes been the only thing that kept me going. But now that I had achieved it, the victory felt different than I'd imagined, less satisfying somehow. Or perhaps satisfying in a different way than expected. I don't know, I answered honestly. Part of me wants to walk away again, mission accomplished. The other part is curious, she finished for me, about what might be possible now that the dynamics have shifted. I nodded, once again, struck by her perception. My grandmother considered me thoughtfully. Let me tell you something about success, Olivia. Something they don't teach in business school. She gestured around the solarium. Look at these plants. Some of them have been in my care for decades. The truly remarkable ones, the ones that bloom most spectacularly, aren't those that had perfect conditions from the start. She pointed to a magnificent orchid with deep purple blooms. This one nearly died 3 times. Disease, improper light, my own mistakes in caring for it. But each time it recovered, it came back stronger, producing blooms twice the size of its more fortunate companions. Adversity as advantage, I murmured. We actually have a chapter about that concept in our company handbook. She smiled. Of course you do. You've always understood intuitively what others need to be taught. She leaned forward. But here's what many people miss. Once you've become strong through adversity, the real test isn't how you use that strength to protect yourself from future harm. It's how you use it to create something new, something that wouldn't have been possible without the struggle. Her words resonated deeply, echoing thoughts I'd had during my journey but had never fully articulated. The Parker family, she continued, for all its flaws, has tremendous influence and resources. resources that could be directed toward meaningful change if guided by the right vision. Her eyes held mine. Your vision, perhaps. I understood what she was suggesting, and it was both compelling and terrifying. Coming back had been about making a point, about closure. What she was describing was something else entirely, not an ending, but a beginning. A challenge far more complex than simply proving my worth. Victoria won't make it easy, I said, testing the idea. My grandmother's laugh was light, but knowing. When has anything worth doing ever been easy? Besides, your mother respects power, even as she resents it in others. You have that now. The question is how you'll use it. Before I could respond, a soft knock at the door interrupted us. Stevens appeared, his expression as composed as ever. Pardon the interruption, Mrs. Parker, Miss Olivia. Lunch is concluding, and Mr. Parker has asked if you would join him in his study. My father. The quiet enigma in my family story. Never Victoria's equal in ambition or ruthlessness, but not without his own kind of strength. He had been caught, between his wife's disapproval and his daughter's rebellion, and in the critical moment, he had chosen peace over principle. I had never fully forgiven him for that. My grandmother caught my hesitation. Go, she said softly. Listen to what he has to say. You might be surprised. I nodded, rising from my chair. Thank you, Gran, for everything. I've done nothing but see what was always there, she replied. The rest you've accomplished entirely on your own. With a final squeeze of her hand, I followed Stevens through the familiar corridors of the house, mentally preparing myself for whatever awaited me in my father's study. The Parker ancestral home was a monument to old money and careful curation. Each piece of artwork, each antique, each architectural detail had been selected not just for beauty, but for the story it told about who the Parkers were, or who they wanted to be seen as. Tradition, stability, unyielding strength. Growing up, I had absorbed these values without questioning them. Success meant following the prescribed path. Innovation was acceptable only within narrow parameters. Risk was something to be carefully calculated, never embraced. How strange to walk these halls now, seeing clearly what I had once accepted as immutable truth. The Parker way wasn't the only way. It wasn't even, necessarily, the best way. Stevens stopped at the heavy oak door of my father's study, knocking discreetly before announcing me. Miss Olivia, sir. Thank you, Stevens. Please come in, Olivia. My father's voice sounded different somehow, less certain than I remembered. I entered the room, taking in the familiar surroundings. Like everything in this house, Charles Parker's study was designed to impress. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes. A massive desk of polished mahogany. Paintings of stern-faced Parker ancestors watching from the walls. My father stood by the window, silhouetted against the afternoon light. He had aged more than I expected in 7 years. His shoulders, once broad and imposing, seemed slightly stooped. His hair, once dark with distinguished touches of silver at the temples, was now fully gray. He turned to face me, and I was struck by the emotion in his eyes. Not anger or disappointment, but something that looked almost like regret. You look well, Olivia, he said after a moment. Success suits you. Thank you, I replied, remaining near the door, uncertain of how to navigate this interaction. He gestured to the pair of leather chairs positioned near the fireplace. Please, sit. Would you like a drink? I was about to have one myself. A little early, isn't it? The words slipped out before I could stop them, echoing countless afternoons when I had found him here, glass in hand, escaping from the pressures of being Charles Parker. A small smile touched his lips. Some conversations require fortification. He moved to the crystal decanter on the sideboard. Scotch still? Or have your tastes changed along with everything else? Scotch is fine, I said, surprising myself by accepting. I rarely drank during business hours, but this wasn't business. Not exactly. I took a seat, watching as he poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into crystal tumblers. His hands, I noticed, weren't quite steady. He handed me a glass and settled into the chair opposite mine. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the silence filled with 7 years of unasked questions. "Your mother will come around," he said finally, "once she's had time to adjust her perspective." I took a sip of scotch, letting the familiar burn ground me. "I didn't come for her approval." "No, I don't imagine you did." He studied me over the rim of his glass. "Why did you come, Olivia?" It was the second time I'd been asked that question, in the span of an hour, and I still wasn't entirely sure of the answer. "Your invitation arrived," I said simply. After 7 years of silence, he nodded slowly. "And you wanted to know why?" "Among other things." My father sighed, setting his glass on the small table between us. "The invitation was Victoria's idea. We had heard rumors. About Horizon's founder. About your success. She didn't believe it, of course. Thought it must be someone else with the same name. So it was a test," I said flatly. She expected me not to show up, confirming her narrative about the failure, who cut ties with her family. Or to show up humbled, seeking reconciliation, he admitted. Either outcome would have satisfied her. And instead, she got the prodigal daughter returning in triumph, I said, a hint of bitterness creeping into my voice. How inconvenient for her. My father was quiet for a moment, then surprised me with a low chuckle. "You should have seen her face when Stevens announced your arrival." For once in her life, Victoria was completely blindsided. Despite myself, I smiled. Not an experience she's accustomed to. No. He took another sip of his drink, but perhaps one that was overdue. I studied him, trying to reconcile this man with the father I remembered, the one who had stood silently by while Victoria systematically attempted to mold me into her image of a proper Parker heir. "You've changed," I observed. He raised an eyebrow. "As have you." "Success will do that," I replied. "So will failure." He set his glass down again, leaning forward. "Olivia, there are things you don't know about the last 7 years, about your mother and me." Something in his tone made me pay closer attention. "What things?" He ran a hand through his gray hair, a gesture of uncharacteristic uncertainty. 2 years after you left, Parker Financial nearly collapsed. A series of bad investments, a trusted partner who turned out to be not so trustworthy. We managed to keep it out of the papers, but it was a near thing. I stared at him, genuinely shocked. Parker Financial had been the cornerstone of our family's wealth for generations. The idea of it faltering was almost unthinkable. "What happened?" I asked. "We salvaged what we could, downsized significantly. Your mother. She didn't take it well." A shadow crossed his face. "The appearances have been maintained, of course. The house, the social obligations, the family name. But beneath the surface, things have been precarious." I tried to process this information. All the while, I had been picturing the Parkers continuing exactly as they always had. Powerful, privileged, untouchable. They had been experiencing their own kind of struggle. "Is that why you invited me back? Because you heard I was successful?" The question came out sharper than I intended. My father looked hurt. "Is that what you think of me? That I would only reach out when you had something to offer?" "I don't know what to think," I replied honestly. 7 years, Dad. Not a call, not a letter, nothing. "You changed your number," he reminded me quietly. "Left no forwarding address. You could have found me if you'd wanted to." He didn't deny it. "Pride," he said after a moment. "Mine, not just Victoria's. You were right, you know. About MIT being the better choice for what you wanted to do. About needing to find your own path. I knew it even then, but I couldn't bring myself to defy your mother, to break from tradition. He looked down at his hands. It was easier to let you go than to fight for what was right. His admission hung in the air between us, unexpected and disarming. I had prepared for defensiveness, for justifications, even for attempts to minimize what had happened. I hadn't prepared for accountability. The invitation, he continued when I remained silent, was originally Victoria's idea, yes, but I was the one who insisted we send it. Because regardless of what she might have hoped to gain, I simply wanted to see my daughter again. His voice roughened slightly, to see if there was any chance of repairing what was broken. The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. The script I had mentally prepared for this confrontation suddenly seemed inadequate. I don't know if it can be repaired, I said finally. A lot has happened. To both of us, it seems. He nodded, accepting this without argument. I understand, but I want you to know something, Olivia. Whatever you may think of me, however I've failed you, and I have failed you in ways I'm only now beginning to fully comprehend. I have always been proud of you. I felt a sudden tightness in my throat. Even when I walked away from everything you valued? Especially then, he said quietly. It took courage I've never had. My father's words lingered in the air between us, honest and unadorned. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. The script I had mentally rehearsed for this reunion hadn't included sincerity or vulnerability, especially not from Charles Parker, who had always been a master of diplomatic evasion. There's something else you should know, he continued, setting his glass down with deliberate care. About Horizon Technologies. I tensed instinctively. Had he discovered something? Some connection I had missed? What about it? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a folder, old, worn at the edges, with a faded label I couldn't quite read from where I sat. Do you remember, he asked, the summer you were 16? You came to me with an idea for a more efficient solar battery design. The memory surfaced immediately. I had spent months developing the concept, filling notebooks with diagrams and calculations, convinced I had found a breakthrough approach. When I finally gathered the courage to show my father, he had listened politely, asked a few questions, then suggested I focus on more practical pursuits. You dismissed it, I said, the old disappointment rising unexpectedly. Said it was too theoretical to have real-world applications. He nodded, a flicker of regret crossing his face. That's what I said. But afterward, I had one of our engineers at Parker Financial review your work. He opened the folder, revealing yellowed pages filled with my teenage handwriting and crude technical sketches. He thought it showed remarkable insight, especially for someone your age. I stared at the folder, memories flooding back. Those early designs had eventually evolved into the core technology that launched Horizon, though it had taken years of refinement and development. I don't understand, I said slowly. If your engineer thought it had merit, why tell me otherwise? My father's expression turned pained. Because Victoria had already planned your entire future. Princeton, Harvard, business school, eventually taking over the family financial firm. He hesitated. She saw your interest in engineering as a distraction, a phase that needed to be discouraged. And you agreed with her, I said flatly. No. His response was unexpectedly firm. I didn't, but I didn't disagree strongly enough to matter. He pushed the folder toward me. I kept this, though, and I've followed the development of Horizon's energy storage technology with particular interest. The core principles are remarkably similar to what you sketched out all those years ago. I picked up the folder, thumbing through the pages with a strange mixture of emotions. Seeing my earliest work, naive but ambitious, flawed but innovative, brought back the pure enthusiasm I had felt before criticism and doubt had taught me to guard my ideas more carefully. "You built it," my father said quietly. "The future you imagined when everyone else was focused on the past. That's extraordinary, Olivia." The genuine admiration in his voice caught me off guard. For years, I had carried the weight of my family's dismissal, using it as fuel for my determination to succeed on my own terms. I had never considered that any of them, least of all my father, might actually understand or value what I had created. "Why are you showing me this now?" I asked. He leaned back in his chair, suddenly looking tired. "Because I want you to know that despite appearances, despite my failures as a father, I always saw you. The real you, not the daughter Victoria." Tried to shape. He met my gaze directly. "And because I think it's time for honesty between us. No more Parker pretense." Something shifted in that moment, a door opening to a possibility I hadn't allowed myself to consider. That perhaps my exit from the family hadn't been as black and white as I had painted it in my memory. That beneath the surface drama and the carefully maintained appearances, there were currents of understanding and even support I had been too hurt to recognize. "Parker Financial," I said after a moment. "How bad is it, really?" He seemed to debate how much to reveal, then sighed. "We're stable now, but diminished. The company's value is about 40% of what it was when you left. We've sold off 3 subsidiaries and liquidated most of our real estate holdings." He gave a rueful smile. "Victoria insisted on keeping the house, of course. Appearances. And the family knows?" "Some suspect. Your grandmother knows everything. Nothing escapes Eleanor. But Victoria has gone to extraordinary lengths to maintain the facade." I nodded, understanding completely. In the Parker universe, the appearance of success was almost more important than success itself. My mother would rather live in a museum of former glory than acknowledge diminished circumstances. "What about Emma? How has she handled it?" At the mention of my sister, my father's expression softened. "She's stronger than anyone gives her credit for. When things were at their worst, she stepped up, took on responsibilities she never asked." "For?" He hesitated. "She's not Victoria's daughter in the way everyone assumes." This surprised me. Emma had always seemed the perfect Parker heir, following all the prescribed steps, never questioning the path laid out for her. Princeton. Undergraduate, MBA from Wharton. Marriage to Bradley Whitman from a suitable family. 2 children right on schedule. The golden child to my black sheep. "She's been asking about you," my father added. "More often, recently." "Has she?" This was unexpected. Emma and I had never been close, separated by 5 years, and fundamentally different approaches to family, expectations. I had always assumed she viewed my departure as a betrayal, or worse, a validation of her own choices to conform. A knock at the door interrupted us. Stevens appeared, his expression characteristically neutral. "Pardon the interruption, Mr. Parker, but Mrs. Parker is requesting Miss Olivia join the ladies for afternoon tea on the terrace." My father and I exchanged a look of mutual understanding, a command disguised as an invitation, Victoria's specialty. "Thank you, Stevens," I said, rising from my chair. "Please tell my mother I'll be there shortly." After the butler had gone, my father stood as well. "Brace yourself," he advised with the ghost of a smile. "Victoria will have had time to regroup. She'll have a new strategy." "I'm counting on it," I replied, surprising myself with how much I meant it. The initial confrontation had been satisfying, but too easy in some ways. My mother at her most calculating would be a more worthy opponent, and perhaps a more interesting one. As I turned to leave, my father called after me. "Olivia." I paused at the door. whatever happens with Victoria. Know that I'm glad you came back. The simple sincerity in his voice touched something I had kept carefully guarded. I'm not sure I'm back, I said honestly, but I'm glad I came. I made my way through the house toward the terrace, using the time to mentally prepare for whatever awaited me. The old Olivia might have approached this meeting with anxiety or defensive anger, but I wasn't that person anymore. 7 years of building something from nothing, of making high-stakes decisions daily, of leading a company through challenges and triumphs had given me a different kind of confidence. I wasn't running from my mother's judgment anymore. I was simply beyond it. The Parker Estates terrace overlooked meticulously landscaped gardens that stretched to the edge of a small lake, all designed to create an impression of effortless natural beauty that was, in reality, maintained through constant intervention and expense, much like the Parker family image itself. As I stepped outside, conversations paused momentarily as heads turned in my direction. The ladies' tea appeared to include every female relative, family friend, and potential ally in my mother's social circle. About 15 women in total, arranged in strategic groupings around elegant wrought iron tables. My mother sat at the center table naturally, with my sister Emma beside her. Victoria Parker looked perfectly composed, not a hair out of place, her expression pleasant but inscrutable, betraying nothing of our earlier confrontation. Only someone who knew her well would notice the slightly too firm set of her shoulders, the careful precision with which she set down her teacup. "Olivia, darling," she called, her voice carrying across the terrace with practiced charm. "We were just discussing you. Do join us." A test and a trap, all in one gracious invitation. I crossed the terrace, aware of the assessing gazes following. My progress. What did they see now? The prodigal daughter? The black sheep-turned success story? Or just another player in Victoria's ongoing social theater? "Mother," I acknowledged, taking the empty seat across from her. "Emma." I nodded to my sister, who returned a small, surprisingly warm smile. "We were just discussing your remarkable achievement with Horizon Technologies," my mother continued smoothly, as if she had been singing my praises all along. "Such an innovative company. We're all just bursting with questions." And there it was, the pivot I had predicted. Not just acceptance of my success, but appropriation of it. In Victoria's revised narrative, my achievement would become a Parker achievement, evidence of the family's illustrious legacy rather than my departure from it. "I'm sure Olivia doesn't want to discuss business at a family gathering," Emma interjected, surprising me with what seemed like a genuine attempt to provide an escape route. "Nonsense," countered Aunt Sylvia from the next table. "We're all dying to know how you managed it, dear. A tech company of all things. Not exactly the Parker way." The slight emphasis on Parker way spoke volumes about the underlying judgment. Success was acceptable, but deviation from tradition remained questionable. I smiled, taking a delicate china cup from the service in front of me. Actually, I'd argue that innovation is precisely the Parker way, historically speaking. I took a sip of tea, then continued. "The first Charles Parker, our great-great-grandfather, made his initial fortune by revolutionizing textile manufacturing techniques, didn't he? And grandmother Eleanor pioneered new investment approaches in the 1970s that were considered quite radical at the time." My mother's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. I had just countered her narrative with an even stronger one, positioning my tech company not as a rejection of family tradition, but as a continuation of its most admirable qualities. "Well remembered," my grandmother's voice cut in from a nearby table, her tone amused. "Though most people conveniently forget that part of our history. Tradition is really just successful innovation that's been around long enough for people to become comfortable with it." Several women laughed, the tension breaking slightly. My mother, ever adaptable, adjusted her approach. "Olivia has always had an excellent memory for history," she said smoothly. And clearly a gift for strategy as well. Tell us, darling, what's next for Horizon? I understand sustainable energy is becoming quite the fashionable investment sector. The subtle diminishment was classic Victoria, reducing revolutionary technology to a passing trend, implying that my success might be as much about timing and fashion as about merit or innovation. Sustainability isn't a fashion, Mother, it's a necessity, I replied calmly. But you're right about one thing. Strategic vision has been essential to our growth. I paused, then added, I learned that from watching you, actually. She blinked, momentarily thrown by the unexpected compliment. Horizon just secured a $300 million government contract to develop grid-scale energy storage systems, Emma said, surprising me again with her knowledge of my company. The largest contract of its kind ever awarded, hardly a passing trend. I glanced at my sister with new appreciation. Not only was she informed about my work, but she was publicly supporting me against our mother's subtle undermining. Emma has become quite the technology enthusiast, my mother said with a tight smile. Bradley's influence, I suppose. The implication was clear. Emma's interest couldn't possibly be genuine or self-generated. Actually, Emma replied with remarkable poise, I've been following the clean energy sector independently for several years now. It's where the real innovation is happening in the investment world. She turned to me. Your battery technology is particularly impressive, Olivia. The efficiency metrics are unprecedented. The conversation had veered into unexpected territory. Emma, perfect, compliant Emma, was not only knowledgeable about my field, but willing to challenge our mother's narrative in public. This was a side of my sister I had never seen before. For the next half hour, I navigated the subtle currents of Parker family politics as various relatives and friends probed for details about my life and company. Some questions were genuine, others designed to expose vulnerabilities or reinforce existing hierarchies. Through it all, my mother maintained her composure, occasionally steering the conversation toward topics that emphasized family connection and continuity, subtly reclaiming my success as part of the Parker legacy rather than a repudiation of it. What surprised me most, however, was Emma's consistent support. Without being obvious about it, she deflected the most pointed questions, corrected misconceptions about the tech industry, and occasionally supplied details about Horizon that revealed how closely she had been following my career. As the gathering began to disperse, with women breaking off into smaller groups to prepare for the evening's more formal dinner, Emma touched my arm lightly. Could we talk privately for a moment? She asked, her voice low enough that only I could hear. I nodded, curious about this unfamiliar version of my sister. We made our excuses and moved away from the terrace, following a stone path that wound through the rose garden, another of my grandmother's domains, though less personal than her beloved solarium. For a few minutes, we walked in silence. Despite growing up in the same house, Emma and I had rarely spent time alone together. The age gap had been part of it, but more significant was our different standing in our mother's eyes. Emma had been the perfect daughter, meeting every expectation without apparent effort. I had been the problem, the challenge, the one who required constant correction and guidance. Or so I had always thought. I've been following your work since the beginning, Emma said finally, breaking the silence. Since before Horizon had a name. I glanced at her surprised. How? I was pretty careful to keep a low profile in the early days. She smiled. I have resources of my own, and motivation. Motivation? She stopped walking, turning to face me directly. Without the performative aspect required in our mother's presence, Emma seemed different, more grounded, more authentic. You inspired me, Olivia, she said simply. When you left, when you chose your own path despite everything, it changed how I saw things. I stared at her, trying to reconcile this statement with the Emma I thought I knew, the one who had seemingly embraced every aspect of the life I had rejected. But you stayed, I said, confused. You followed the Parker plan perfectly. She laughed softly, but there was a hint of something sad in it. Did I? Or did I just find a different way to create space for myself within the constraints? We resumed walking, the gravel crunching softly beneath our feet. After you left, things changed, she continued. Mother became more controlling, if you can imagine that. More determined that everything should be perfect, that the Parker image should remain untarnished. She plucked a rose petal absently. I realized I couldn't fight her directly the way you did. I didn't have your courage or your clarity. So what did you do? I asked, genuinely curious now. I played the game, she replied. I gave her the appearance she wanted. Princeton, business school, the right husband from the right family. She gave me a sideways glance. But beneath that, I've been building something of my own. What kind of something? She hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. A venture capital firm specializing in women-led startups in the clean technology sector. A small, proud smile touched her lips. We call it Future-Focused Partners. It's small but growing. We've funded 17 companies in the last 3 years. I stopped in my tracks, genuinely stunned. Emma, that's incredible. Does Mother know? She thinks it's a hobby, a little charitable endeavor to keep me occupied while I prepare to eventually take a proper role at Parker Financial. Her expression turned serious. She doesn't know that 3 of our investments have already outperformed Parker Financial's annual returns, or that I've been methodically building relationships with the most innovative founders in the renewable energy space. I was seeing my sister with new eyes. All these years I had cast her as the conformist, the one who had chosen the easier path of compliance. In reality, she had been navigating her own form of resistance, less dramatic than my complete break, but in some ways requiring even more sustained courage and strategic thinking. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Emma looked at me directly, all pretense gone. Because I want to invest in Horizon's next funding round. Not as a Parker, not as your sister, but as a partner who believes in what you're building. I hadn't seen that coming. You know we're preparing for Series D funding, I said cautiously. How did you know that? She smiled. Like I said, I have resources, and I've been watching your trajectory closely. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a slim folder. This is my proposal. Full financial disclosure for future-focused partners, our investment thesis, and a term sheet for your consideration. I took the folder, momentarily speechless. My sister, the golden child, the perfect Parker, had been living a double life. All these years, building something meaningful in the shadows while maintaining the appearance of conformity. I never knew, I said finally. All this time, I thought, that I was just Mother's puppet? She shook her head. You weren't the only one who inherited Dad's innovator genes and Grand's determination. You just found a more direct path to independence. As we stood there in the rose garden, surrounded by the legacy of generations of Parkers, I felt something unexpected, a genuine connection with my sister for perhaps the first time in our adult lives. I'll look at your proposal, I promised, and regardless of what comes of that, I'm glad to know the real Emma Parker. She smiled, and I saw in her expression a reflection of my own journey, different in its execution but similar in its underlying determination. The annual Parker family photo is scheduled before dinner, she said, glancing at her watch. Mother will expect us both to be there, looking appropriately unified and successful. Back to the performance, I remarked, feeling a familiar weariness at the thought. Emma's eyes held a new spark of mischief. Maybe, or maybe it's time for a new kind of Parker family narrative, one that has room for both of us as we actually are. As we walked back toward the house together, I considered the unexpected allies I had discovered today. My grandmother, who had been following my progress all along. My father, who had kept the earliest seeds of my visions safe all these years. And now Emma, who had forged her own path of quiet rebellion. The Parker family dynamics were far more complex than the simple narrative I had carried with me these past 7 years. And perhaps that meant the future held more possibilities than I had allowed myself to imagine. The annual Parker family photograph was a ritual as choreographed as a royal portrait. Each year, family members were arranged on the grand staircase in the main hall, positioned according to an unspoken hierarchy that everyone understood. My grandfather, when he was alive, had always occupied the center position on the middle step. After his passing, my mother had claimed that space as her own, with my father standing slightly behind her. As Emma and I approached the gathering crowd, I could see my mother directing the proceedings with characteristic precision. Cousins, aunts, uncles, and in-laws were being arranged like chess pieces, each placement a subtle statement about their standing in the family. "Olivia!" she called when she spotted us, her voice carrying the perfect blend of warmth and authority. "There you are. We've been waiting." Her smile was flawless, no trace of our earlier confrontation visible to the casual observer. "You'll stand here next to your father." Not coincidentally, this position would place me at the edge of the frame, present but peripheral. I had expected nothing less. "Actually, Mother," Emma said before I could respond, "I think Olivia should be in the center with you and Dad. It's been 7 years since she's been in the family photo, and her return is worth celebrating." Ripple of surprise passed through the assembled family members. Emma rarely contradicted our mother, especially in public. Victoria's smile remained fixed, but her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "How thoughtful of you, darling," she replied smoothly. "But tradition dictates that the family principals occupy the central positions. As Olivia has chosen to pursue her own path separate from Parker Financial, I think the established arrangement is most appropriate." It was a masterstroke of passive-aggressive maneuvering, acknowledging my success while simultaneously diminishing its relevance to the Parker family narrative. 7 years ago, I would have either accepted the slight silently or stormed off in anger. Today, I had different options. "Speaking of Parker Financial," I said pleasantly, "I've been thinking about potential synergies between Horizon Technologies and the family business. There might be interesting opportunities for collaboration." My mother's careful composure faltered for just a moment, long enough for me to know my counter had landed. I had no actual intention of merging my company with Parker Financial, but the mere suggestion shifted the power dynamic. Suddenly, my position at the edge of the family portrait seemed less like exclusion and more like a statement of independent strength. "How interesting," my mother managed. "We should certainly discuss that at a more appropriate time." "I look forward to it," I replied with a smile. The family photographer, a long-suffering professional who had been documenting Parker gatherings for decades, cleared his throat nervously. "If everyone could take their positions, please. The light is perfect right now." What followed was a subtle ballet of power and positioning. I took my assigned spot at the edge of the group without complaint, but stood tall and confident, angling my body slightly inward rather than accepting the role of peripheral afterthought. Emma positioned herself nearby, creating a visual connection between us that altered the traditional Parker hierarchy. My father, in a move that couldn't have been accidental, placed his hand on my shoulder, a gesture of endorsement that would be unmistakable in the final image. My mother noticed every adjustment, every small rebellion against her careful choreography, but could do nothing without disrupting the appearance of perfect family harmony that was so essential to her self-image. Her smile remained fixed as the photographer captured frame after frame, but the tension in her shoulders told a different story. "Wonderful," the photographer announced finally. "I think we have everything we need." As the group dispersed, my cousin James approached, his expression a careful blend of collegial interest and calculation. James ran one of the most successful private equity firms on the East Coast and had a reputation for spotting opportunities before anyone else. Olivia, he greeted me with a kiss on the cheek that was more performance than affection. You've been holding out on us. Horizon Technologies. I've been trying to get a meeting with the founder for months, never realizing it was my own cousin. Hello, James, I replied. I heard your firm has been making inquiries. He smiled, all perfect teeth and practiced charm. Can you blame me? Your battery technology is revolutionizing the industry. The applications are endless. He lowered his voice conspiratorially. We should talk privately. I have some ideas about scaling your operation that could be very lucrative for both of us. Before I could respond, Emma appeared at my side as if by magic. James, she said warmly, I see you've reconnected with Olivia. How wonderful. She linked her arm through mine in a gesture of casual solidarity. Unfortunately, we've promised to help grandmother with something before dinner. Perhaps you two could catch up tomorrow? James looked momentarily disappointed, but recovered quickly. Of course. Family first. Always. He gave me a significant look. But don't leave without us having that conversation, Olivia. It could be transformative. As he walked away, I turned to Emma with raised eyebrows. Transformative? She rolled her eyes. James has been trying to get a piece of the clean energy sector for the past year. He's always 6 months behind. The truly innovative opportunities, but convinced he's ahead of the curve. She gave me a knowing smile. He has no idea I've already established a relationship with 3 of your competitors. I laughed, genuinely delighted by this new, shrewd version of my sister. You're full of surprises, Emma Parker. I had a good teacher, she replied, and I knew she wasn't referring to our mother. Did we really promise to help grandmother with something, or was that an elegant extraction strategy? Both, she said, steering me toward the east wing. Gran asked to see us before dinner. She was quite specific about wanting to speak with both of us together. The solarium was bathed in golden late-afternoon light when we arrived, the glass walls creating a luminous quality that always made the space feel somewhat magical. My grandmother was seated in her favorite chair, but she wasn't alone. My father stood nearby, his expression serious but strangely resolved, as if a decision had been made. Ah, my girls, grandmother said as we entered. Right on time, close. The door. Would you, Emma? The formality of the request made me wonder what was coming. Family meetings convened by Eleanor Parker were rare and always significant. I won't waste time with pleasantries, my grandmother began once we were seated. At my age, time becomes an increasingly precious commodity. She fixed me with her penetrating gaze. Olivia, your return has precipitated something I've been considering for some time. A restructuring, you might call it. I glanced at my father, whose face revealed nothing. Emma beside me seemed equally in the dark. What kind of restructuring? I asked cautiously. My grandmother reached for a leather portfolio on the table beside her. Parker Financial is at a crossroads, she said bluntly. The strategies that served us well for decades are no longer sufficient in today's market. Your father has done his best to adapt, but... She gave him an apologetic look. Charles is the first to admit that innovation isn't his strongest suit. My father nodded, accepting this assessment without argument. The company needs new vision, he acknowledged, fresh approaches. Traditionally, my grandmother continued, leadership of Parker Financial passes to the eldest child. That would be you, Olivia. She held up a hand to forestall my immediate objection. Obviously, you've built something remarkable with Horizon. No one expects you to abandon that. Then what exactly are we discussing? I asked, growing increasingly confused by this conversation. My grandmother opened the portfolio and removed several documents. I'm proposing a new structure for the Parker family holdings, one that acknowledges the changing landscape and leverages the distinct talents within our family. She handed each of us a document, a detailed organizational chart outlining a complete reorganization of the Parker assets and businesses. Parker Global Holdings, I read from the top of the chart. A parent company with 4 distinct divisions. I looked up in surprise, one of which is Horizon Technologies. My grandmother nodded. The proposal is this. We create a formal family holding company that unifies our various enterprises while allowing each to maintain its operational independence. Parker Financial would become one division, focused on traditional asset management. Horizon would become another, focused on technological innovation. The real estate portfolio would become the third. And the fourth? Emma asked, studying her copy of the chart. My grandmother smiled. Future-focused partners, your venture. Capital firm, Emma. Emma's head snapped up. You know about that? My dear, I've been following your investments with great interest. That Baker woman's solar desalination project is particularly promising. I stared at my grandmother, then at my father, trying to process what they were proposing. You want to bring Horizon under the Parker family umbrella? After all this time? Not under, my father corrected. Alongside, as equals. He stepped forward. Olivia, this isn't about reclaiming your success or subordinating your company to family control. It's about creating something stronger together than we could achieve separately. I frowned, unconvinced. And Mother? What does she think of this radical restructuring? A look passed between my father and grandmother, a silent communication that spoke volumes. Victoria hasn't been briefed on the specifics yet, my grandmother said carefully. She knows changes are coming, but not their exact nature. She's not going to like it, Emma observed, especially the part about my firm being elevated to equal standing with Parker Financial. No, my grandmother agreed. She won't. But Victoria doesn't control the family trusts. I do. Her expression softened slightly. Your mother is brilliant in many ways, but she's too wedded to tradition. Too concerned with appearances. The world is changing too rapidly for that approach to succeed much longer. I set the document down slowly, my mind racing with implications. Even if I were to consider this, and I'm not saying I am, Horizon has investors, a board of directors. I can't unilaterally decide to merge with a family holding company. Of course not, my father acknowledged. This would be a process, not an overnight transformation. We're asking you to consider the possibility, to help us design a structure that could work for everyone involved. Why now? I asked, the crucial question that had been building since I arrived. Why after 7 years of silence? My grandmother set aside her portfolio. Because crisis creates opportunity, Olivia. Parker Financial is struggling, not failing, but stagnating. Horizon is thriving, but will eventually face the scaling challenges that all successful startups encounter. Emma's venture firm has enormous potential but limited capital. Separately, each enterprise has significant vulnerabilities. Together. She spread her hands, the gesture eloquently completing her thought. The strategic logic was sound, I had to admit. But family businesses were complicated. Emotions and histories tangling with financial considerations in ways that often defied rational analysis. And this restructuring, I said slowly, who would lead it? Another look passed between my father and grandmother. We were hoping you would, my father said simply, as CEO of Parker Global Holdings. The statement hung in the air like a held breath. 7 years ago, I had walked away from the family legacy, determined to build something that was entirely my own. Now they were asking me not just to return, but to take the helm of an expanded version of that legacy. This isn't about bringing you back into the fold, Olivia, my grandmother said, reading my expression accurately. It's about expanding the fold to include the remarkable things you've already built. I looked at Emma, whose face showed a complex mixture of emotions. "What about you?" I asked her. "How do you feel about all this?" She considered for a moment before answering. "Honestly, it's terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure." A small smile curved her lips. "But I've spent years building something in the shadows. The idea of bringing it into the light, of having the resources to expand it meaningfully." She shrugged. "It's compelling." "And Mother's reaction doesn't concern you?" I pressed. "Oh, it does," Emma admitted. "But I've spent my entire adult life navigating Victoria Parker's expectations and disappointments. I've become rather good at it." Her expression turned serious. "The question is whether what we could build together is worth the inevitable conflict." I stood and walked to the glass wall of the solarium, looking out over the gardens now bathed in the golden light of approaching sunset. The timing of this proposal seemed almost too perfect, orchestrated to coincide with my triumphant return, designed to capitalize on the shifted power dynamics my success had created. And yet, I couldn't deny the strategic logic. Horizon was approaching a critical growth phase where additional resources and connections could make the difference between good growth and explosive expansion. The Parker name, despite recent setbacks, still carried weight in financial circles. Emma's venture capital expertise could provide access to emerging technologies and talent pipelines that would take years to develop independently. "I'm not saying yes," I said finally, turning back to face them. "This requires proper due diligence, detailed terms, absolutely clear governance structures." I met my grandmother's eyes directly. "And a frank conversation with Mother before anything moves forward." My grandmother nodded, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I would have expected nothing less methodical from you, Olivia. You always were the most thorough of the grandchildren. When do you plan to present this to Mother?" Emma asked. "Tonight," my father answered. "After dinner, in my study." I raised my eyebrows. "That soon?" "The annual family gathering provides a unique opportunity," my grandmother explained. "All the key stakeholders are present, and the timing aligns with the quarterly board meeting next week." She fixed me with that penetrating gaze again. "Besides, I'm 90 years old, my dear. I've learned not to postpone difficult conversations unnecessarily." The dinner gong sounded in the distance, its resonant tone echoing through the house, another Parker tradition unchanged by time or circumstance. "Shall we?" my father suggested, offering his arm to my grandmother, who rose with the elegant dignity that had always characterized her. As we made our way toward the formal dining room, I felt a strange sense of déjà vu. Walking these familiar corridors with my family, preparing to take my place at the table. But this time, everything was different. I wasn't the rebellious daughter or the black sheep returning in triumph. I was being invited to redefine what the Parker legacy could become. The question was whether I wanted that responsibility and whether the price of admitting my family back into my carefully constructed life was one I was willing to pay. The Parker dining room at full capacity was an impressive sight. 25 people seated around the massive table that had been in the family for generations, gleaming silver and crystal catching the light from the chandelier overhead. The seating arrangement, like everything in Parker gatherings, followed a precise protocol that reflected the family hierarchy. Victoria Parker sat at the head of the table, naturally, with my father at the opposite end. The most valued family members and guests were seated closest to them, with importance diminishing as distance increased. In previous years, I had always been placed somewhere in the middle, important enough as a daughter to merit decent placement, but not valued enough for a premium position. Tonight, however, I found myself seated at my father's right hand, a position of honor that would be noticed by everyone present. Opposite me, at my father's left, sat my grandmother. Emma was placed beside my mother, balancing the symbolic weight at both ends of the table. My mother noticed these deviations from tradition immediately. her eyes narrowing slightly as she took in the new arrangement. But with guests present, she said nothing, maintaining the perfect hostess persona that she had perfected over decades. "A toast," she announced once everyone was seated and wine had been poured. "To family, our greatest strength and legacy." Glasses were raised around the table, the ritualistic words accepted without question. But I caught Emma's eye across the table, a silent acknowledgement passing between us. Family could be strength or prison, legacy or burden, often all at once. Dinner proceeded with the elegant precision that characterized all Parker gatherings. Conversation ebbed and flowed, carefully steered away from anything too controversial or revealing. Business was discussed in broad, optimistic terms. Politics were acknowledged only in the most neutral language. Personal matters were touched on briefly, always with an emphasis on achievement and success rather than challenge or struggle. It was theater, as it had always been. But now I could see the performance for what it was, a carefully maintained facade that had less to do with actual circumstances than with the image the Parkers wished to project to the world and to themselves. What struck me most, watching my relatives interact, was how exhausting it all seemed. Every comment carefully calibrated, every reaction measured, every facial expression controlled. Even the laughter felt rehearsed, erupting at precisely the right moments and never lingering too long or growing too boisterous. Had it always been this way? Had I once been so immersed in this performance that it seemed natural, even necessary? "You're quiet tonight, Olivia," my mother observed during a lull in the general conversation. After such a triumphant return, I would have expected you to have more to share with the family. The comment was perfectly pitched to sound like concern while actually serving as a challenge. Classic Victoria Parker technique. "I'm observing," I replied simply. "It's been 7 years. Some things have changed. Others haven't at all." My mother's smile remained fixed, but I could see calculation behind her eyes. Change and constancy. Both have their place, don't they? The Parker name has endured for generations precisely because we know which traditions to preserve and which to, adapt. "An interesting perspective," my grandmother interjected from across the table. "Though I sometimes wonder if we haven't been too conservative in our adaptations. The world moves quickly these days." It was a seemingly innocent comment, but I recognized it as the opening salvo in the confrontation to come after dinner. My mother clearly sensed something as well, her gaze sharpening as she looked from my grandmother to my father and back. "Conservative approaches have served us well," she responded carefully, "particularly in uncertain times." "Caution has its place," my father acknowledged, "but so does bold action when circumstances demand it." The subtext of these exchanges would have been invisible to most of the table's occupants, but to those of us aware of the proposed restructuring, every word carried additional weight. "Speaking of bold action," James said from further down the table, "Olivia, you must tell everyone about Horizon's recent government contract. 300 million, wasn't it? Quite the achievement." All eyes turned to me, including my mother's, hers calculating where others were merely curious. "The contract is significant," I confirmed. "But what matters more is what it enables. We're developing energy storage systems that could fundamentally change how power grids function, making renewable energy more reliable and accessible." "Always the idealist," my mother commented with a small laugh. "But I suppose vision has its place alongside practical business concerns." The dismissive tone was subtle but unmistakable, positioning my work as somewhat naive compared to the serious business of Parker Financial. "Vision and practicality aren't mutually exclusive," Emma said, surprising everyone by directly challenging our mother's framing. "In fact, the most successful enterprises combine both. Horizon's market capitalization suggests Olivia has managed that balance quite effectively. A brief, charged silence followed this comment. Emma rarely contradicted our mother, and never, in public settings like this. My mother recovered quickly. Of course, darling. I didn't mean to suggest otherwise. Olivia's success speaks for itself. She turned to address the wider table. We're tremendously proud of what she's accomplished independently. The Parker drive for excellence manifests in various ways across generations. And there it was again, the subtle reframing of my success, as ultimately a product of Parker genetics and values rather than my deliberate departure from them. 7 years ago, this rhetorical sleight of hand would have infuriated me. Tonight, I found it almost amusing in its transparency. Independence has been clarifying, I agreed pleasantly. It's remarkable what you can build when you're free to pursue your own vision. My mother's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Freedom is indeed valuable, as is the foundation of family support and tradition. Both have their place, my grandmother observed, effectively ending that particular thread of conversation. Now, who would like dessert? Stevens has prepared his famous lemon tart. As coffee and dessert were served, I caught my father checking his watch discreetly. The after-dinner meeting loomed, its potential to reshape the Parker family dynamic growing more real with each passing minute. When the meal finally concluded, my father stood, catching my mother's eye. Victoria, could I speak with you in my study? There's a business matter we should discuss before tomorrow. Of course, she replied smoothly, though a flicker of wariness crossed her face. She was too astute not to sense that something significant was brewing. Now, if you don't mind, Olivia, Emma, Mother, would you join us as well? My mother's expression sharpened instantly. The inclusion of both daughters and my grandmother signaled that this was no routine business discussion. Is something wrong, Charles? She asked, her voice carefully modulated to show concern rather than the suspicion I could see in her eyes. Not wrong, he assured her, but important, perhaps transformative. As we made our excuses to the rest of the family and moved toward my father's study, I could feel the tension emanating from my mother. For perhaps the first time in her adult life, Victoria Parker was walking into a situation she hadn't orchestrated and couldn't control. The black sheep was no longer on the periphery. I had moved to the center of the narrative, bringing with me the power to redefine what the Parker legacy could become. Whether that redefinition would include reconciliation or merely a more complex form of estrangement remained to be seen. My father's study felt smaller with 5 of us inside it, the air heavy with anticipation and unspoken history. My mother took her customary seat near the fireplace, her posture perfect, her expression composed but watchful. My grandmother settled into the leather chair opposite, while Emma and I stood near my father's desk. He remained standing, unusually restless as he gathered the documents that would reshape our family's future. Charles, my mother said, her voice carrying that particular blend of patience and expectation she reserved for moments when she felt her time was being wasted. What exactly is this about? We have guests waiting. The guests can entertain themselves for an hour, my grandmother replied before my father could respond. This is more important. My mother's gaze shifted to her mother-in-law, a flicker of something. Annoyance? Concern? Crossing her features. I see. And what is this exactly? My father cleared his throat. Victoria, we need to discuss the future of Parker Financial and the broader structure of our family holdings. She frowned slightly. I wasn't aware there was anything to discuss. The quarterly board meeting is next week. Any strategic matters can be addressed then, with the appropriate advisors present. This conversation needs to happen now, my father said with unusual firmness. With family only. My mother's eyes narrowed as she registered his tone. Charles Parker rarely contradicted his wife directly, especially in family matters. His assertiveness now signaled that something significant had shifted. "Very well," she said, folding her hands in her lap with deliberate composure. "I'm listening." My father took a deep breath and laid out the proposal. The creation of Parker Global Holdings, the integration of Horizon Technologies, and Emma's venture capital firm alongside the traditional Parker financial business, the restructuring of family assets under a unified but diversified entity. He spoke clearly and methodically, presenting the concept as a strategic necessity rather than a family revolution. My mother listened without interruption, her expression revealing nothing. Only the slight whitening of her knuckles as she clasped. Her hands suggested the emotional impact of what she was hearing. When my father finished, she remained silent for a long moment, her gaze moving from him to my grandmother, then to Emma, and finally resting on me. "I see," she said finally, her voice perfectly controlled. "And when was this plan conceived? During today's convenient private meetings from which I was conspicuously absent?" "The general concept has been under consideration for some time," my father replied carefully. "Today's conversations were about refining the approach and assessing whether Olivia and Emma would be open to exploring the possibility." "How thoughtful of you to include our daughters in these discussions before consulting with me." The words were spoken softly, but the edge beneath them was unmistakable. And am I to understand correctly that this restructuring would effectively dilute Parker Financial's position within the family holdings, the company that has sustained the Parker name for 4 generations? "It would reposition Parker Financial as one division within a larger, more diversified enterprise," my grandmother corrected. "Not diminish it, but strengthen it through integration with complementary businesses." My mother turned to face her directly. "And Olivia would lead this integrated enterprise?" Despite having abandoned the family and built her career explicitly in rejection of Parker traditions and values? The characterization stung, but I kept my expression neutral. This wasn't about my feelings or even my mother's perception of my choices. It was about something much larger. "I haven't agreed to anything yet," I said calmly. "This is a preliminary discussion of possibilities, not a finalized plan." "How reassuring," my mother replied, her voice dripping with barely concealed sarcasm. "And you, Emma? Were you also surprised by this proposal, or have you been part of these secret discussions all along?" Emma met our mother's gaze steadily. "I learned about it today, just as Olivia did. But I'm open to exploring the concept. It could create significant value and opportunities." "Value and opportunities," my mother repeated. Interesting phrases from someone who has shown so little interest in the family business until now. "That's unfair, Victoria," my father interjected. "Emma has been contributing valuable insights to Parker Financial for years, even while developing her own expertise in emerging markets." My mother's laugh was short and brittle. "Her own expertise?" I wasn't aware Emma had developed any professional focus outside her responsibilities to the family. "That's because you never asked," Emma said quietly. "You assumed I was simply following the path you laid out, never considering that I might be building something of my own as well." For the first time, my mother looked genuinely taken aback. Emma had rarely challenged her so directly. "Future, focused partners," my grandmother said into the uncomfortable silence. "Quite an impressive little venture capital operation. 17 companies funded in 3 years, 3 of them already showing exceptional returns. Emma has quite the eye for innovation, particularly in the clean energy space." My mother's expression flickered between surprise and something harder to define, perhaps the first realization that she had fundamentally misunderstood both of her daughters. "I see," she said again, but this time the words held a different weight. "So, this is less a strategic restructuring than a family coup. How long have you been planning this, Eleanor?" Waiting for the perfect moment to undermine my position? My grandmother sighed. This isn't about you, Victoria. It's about ensuring the Parker legacy survives in a changing world. Charles has been trying to tell you for years that Parker Financial needs to evolve, but you've resisted every significant change. I've protected our traditions and standards, my mother countered. Maintained the reputation and relationships that have sustained this family for generations. At what cost? I asked, unable to remain silent any longer. The world is changing. Mother, industries are being disrupted. New technologies are creating opportunities and threats that didn't exist even 5 years ago. Tradition alone isn't enough anymore. She turned to me, her expression cooling. And you would know about Parker traditions and values? You, who walked away at the first sign of resistance to your ideas? I walked away because you left me no choice, I replied evenly. Because you were so convinced of the rightness of your vision that you couldn't see the potential in mine. And now you return in triumph, ready to take control of everything your father and I have built? Her voice remained controlled, but I could hear the anger beneath it. That's not what this is about, I said, frustration beginning to color my tone despite my efforts. This isn't about triumph or control or vindication. It's about creating something stronger together than any of us could build separately. Together, she repeated skeptically. How convenient that this spirit of togetherness emerges only after you've achieved success on your own. Where was this collaborative instinct 7 years ago? 7 years ago, you told me I would amount to nothing without this family, I reminded her, the words still sharp in my memory. You made it clear that my ideas had no place in the Parker legacy unless they conformed to your vision of what that legacy should be. My mother's gaze didn't waver. And yet here you are, successful beyond what even you probably imagined possible. Perhaps my approach motivated you more effectively than you care to admit. The statement was so breathtaking in its audacity that for a moment I could only stare at her. She was actually attempting to take credit for my success, reimagining her rejection as some form of tough love motivation. Victoria, my father said wearily, this isn't productive. The proposal deserves serious consideration based on its merits, not as an extension of old grievances. Old grievances, she echoed. Is that what you call my decades of dedication to this family? My tireless work to maintain our position and legacy? She rose from her chair with deliberate dignity. I've given everything to the Parker name, everything. And this is how you repay that sacrifice? By plotting behind my back. To hand control to the daughter who rejected everything we stand for? I never rejected the family, I countered, struggling to keep my voice level. I rejected the limitations you tried to place on my potential. There's a difference. A convenient distinction, she said dismissively. My grandmother, who had been watching this exchange with the patient assessment of someone who had witnessed many family conflicts over her long life, now leaned forward in her chair. Victoria, she said, her voice carrying the quiet authority that had always commanded respect. You're not hearing what's being said. This isn't about rejecting your contributions or diminishing your role. It's about acknowledging that different times require different approaches. And my approach is suddenly inadequate? After all I've done to protect and elevate this family? Your approach was appropriate for its era, my grandmother replied diplomatically. But the world Olivia and Emma are operating in is fundamentally different from the one you navigated so successfully. Their expertise and perspectives are precisely what the family needs now. My mother's expression hardened. So I'm to be set aside? A relic of a bygone era? No one is suggesting that, my father said quickly. Your experience and connections remain invaluable, but the leadership structure needs to evolve. Into what exactly? My mother demanded. A technology company run by my estranged daughter? A venture capital operation led by Emma, who has zero public track record in the industry? How do you imagine our board will react to this proposal? Our banking partners? the clients who have trusted Parker Financial for generations? With the right presentation and transition plan, they'll recognize the strategic benefits, I said. Horizon brings cutting-edge technology and innovation. Emma's firm brings access to emerging markets and talent. Parker Financial brings stability and established relationships. Together, they create a diversified powerhouse that's resistant to disruption and positioned for long-term growth. My mother stared at me, something shifting in her expression. For the first time, I saw her truly seeing me. Not as the rebellious daughter or the black sheep or even the prodigal returnee, but as a businesswoman with a vision and strategy of my own. "You've thought this through," she said, more statement, then question. "I've been considering the possibilities since this afternoon," I acknowledged. "The strategic logic is compelling, whatever personal complications might exist." She turned to Emma. "And you? How long have you been building this venture capital operation behind my back?" Emma straightened her shoulders. 3 years. And not behind your back, Mother. I simply didn't volunteer information you never asked for." 3 years, my mother repeated softly. Then, with a sudden sharpness, "With whose money? Where did the initial capital come from?" Emma glanced at my grandmother, who nodded slightly. "Gran provided the seed funding," Emma admitted. $1 million to start. I've grown it to 37 million under management." My mother's eyes widened, then narrowed as she turned to my grandmother. "You funded this without telling me? Without discussing it with the family?" "It was my personal money to invest as I saw fit," my grandmother replied calmly, and Emma presented a compelling business case. "A business case," my mother echoed faintly. "My own daughter and mother-in-law, conducting business behind my back. Perhaps if you had shown more interest in Emma's ideas and aspirations, she wouldn't have felt the need to develop them privately," my grandmother suggested, her tone gentle but the message unmistakable. A heavy silence fell over the room. My mother stood perfectly still, her expression unreadable as she processed this new reality. Both of her daughters had built successful enterprises outside her knowledge or influence. Her mother-in-law and husband were now proposing a restructuring that would fundamentally alter her role and status within the family hierarchy. Everything she had carefully constructed and controlled for decades was shifting beneath her feet. In that moment, I felt an unexpected pang of empathy for her. Victoria Parker had dedicated her life to maintaining a certain vision of the Parker legacy. She had sacrificed, strategized, and maneuvered tirelessly in service of that vision. To have it challenged so fundamentally, so unexpectedly, must be profoundly disorienting. "Mother," I said, softening my tone, "this doesn't have to be adversarial. The proposal has merit from a business perspective, but its success would depend on bringing together all our strengths, including yours." She looked at me sharply, skepticism clear in her eyes. "You expect me to believe that after 7 years of estrangement, you're suddenly interested in a collaborative partnership? That this isn't about proving me wrong?" "This isn't about proving anything," I insisted. "It's about recognizing that the business landscape has changed dramatically, and the Parker family has resources and talents that could be leveraged more effectively together than separately." "A convenient narrative," she observed coolly. My father stepped forward. "Victoria, at least consider the proposal on its merits. We can engage outside advisors to evaluate the financial and strategic implications. Make an informed decision based on facts rather than emotion." "Facts rather than emotion," she repeated. An interesting suggestion from a man who has just proposed overturning 4 generations of family business structure based on a single day's conversations. "The conversations may have happened today," my grandmother interjected, "but the underlying issues have been building for years. Parker Financial's performance has been stagnant. Traditional asset management is facing unprecedented disruption. The family needs new directions and approaches to thrive in the coming decades. My mother turned to face her directly. And you? Believe my daughters, one who abandoned the family entirely and another who has been operating a secret business venture, are better positioned to navigate these challenges than I am? I believe, my grandmother replied with pointed emphasis, that the combined expertise of all involved, including yours, offers the best path forward. But that requires you to see Olivia and Emma as the capable businesswomen they've become, not simply as daughters who should follow your lead without question. The bluntness of this assessment seemed to land with particular force. My mother's composure faltered momentarily, a flash of genuine hurt crossing her features before the careful mask slipped back into place. I see, she said after a moment. And if I oppose this restructuring, what then? My grandmother and father exchanged glances. The family trusts give Eleanor controlling interest, my father said carefully. If she believes this direction is in the best interest of the family's long-term prosperity, she has the authority to implement it. So, my opinion is ultimately irrelevant, my mother concluded, her voice suddenly tired. This meeting is merely a courtesy, not a genuine consultation. Your cooperation and expertise would be invaluable to making this transition successful, my father countered. No one wants to proceed without your involvement, Victoria. She laughed softly, the sound hollow. How generous. You'll allow me to participate in dismantling everything I've helped build. Not dismantling, Emma said quietly. Evolving. Building upon the foundation you created, not destroying it. My mother looked at her for a long moment, then shifted her gaze to me. And you, Olivia? What do you want from all this? Surely not just a business arrangement. It was a perceptive question, cutting to the heart of what I had been struggling with since the proposal was first presented. What did I want? Vindication? Recognition? Some form of reconciliation? Or simply the strategic advantages that would come from combining our resources and expertise? I began, then paused, searching for the right words. I want to build something meaningful, something that leverages the best of what the Parker legacy represents while creating new possibilities for the future. And yes, maybe I want some acknowledgement that my path, though different from the one you envisioned, had value and validity. Acknowledgement, she repeated softly. You want me to admit I was wrong. I want you to recognize that there was more than one right way forward, I clarified. That innovation and tradition aren't mutually exclusive, but can strengthen each other when properly integrated. She considered this for a moment, her expression thoughtful. And if I were to acknowledge this perspective, what then? Do we simply pretend the past 7 years never happened? Become one big happy family again, united in purpose and vision? No, I said honestly. Too much has happened for that kind of simple resolution. But we could perhaps build something new, a working relationship based on mutual respect and recognition of each other's strengths and contributions. My mother turned away, moving to the window that overlooked the darkened gardens. For several minutes, she stood in silence, her back to the room, her reflection faintly visible in the glass. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter, less defensive. Do you know why I pushed you so hard, Olivia? Why I insisted on the traditional path? I remained silent, sensing this was a rhetorical question. Because I fought for every inch of influence I have in this family, she continued. The Parker name opens doors, yes, but a Parker woman, especially one who married into the family, has to work twice as hard to be taken seriously in the financial world. Every deviation from tradition, every unconventional choice becomes a potential weakness, a point of vulnerability that others can exploit. She turned back to face us, her expression more open than I had seen it in years. I pushed you toward Princeton and Parker Financial because that path had proven safety and security. because I wanted to spare you the struggles I faced." A faint, rueful smile touched her lips. "Perhaps I underestimated your willingness to struggle on your own terms." The admission, however qualified, was so unexpected that for a moment I didn't know how to respond. My mother had never before acknowledged any possibility that her vision for my life might have been shaped by her own experiences and fears rather than what was objectively best for me. "I chose a different path," I said carefully. "But that doesn't mean I didn't learn from you. Your emphasis on excellence, on strategic thinking, on never settling for less than what you're worth, those lessons shaped how I built Horizon, even as I applied them differently than you might have." Something shifted in her expression, a softening, perhaps even a flash of pride quickly concealed. "You've built something impressive," she conceded. "That much is undeniable." "As have you," I acknowledged. "Parker Financial has been the cornerstone of this family's prosperity for generations. No one is suggesting otherwise." My mother glanced at Emma. "And you? Have you also been applying my lessons while secretly building your venture firm?" Emma smiled slightly. "Every day. Your attention to detail, your instinct for people's true motivations, your persistence. I wouldn't have succeeded without those traits you instilled in me. I just applied them to opportunities you might not have considered viable." My mother shook her head, a complex mixture of emotions crossing her face. "My daughters, the secret entrepreneurs. I don't know whether to be proud or horrified." "Both seem appropriate," my grandmother suggested with a hint of amusement. "Perhaps," my mother allowed. She returned to her seat, her posture still perfect but somehow less rigid than before. "This proposed restructuring, I assume you have more detailed documentation than what Charles presented?" My father nodded, reaching for a folder on his desk. "The preliminary framework, yes. Any actual implementation would require substantial legal and financial analysis, of course." She held out her hand for the documents. "I'll review them tonight. I make no promises about my position, but I will consider the proposal seriously." She fixed my grandmother with a direct look. "Though I would appreciate being included in any future discussions about the family's financial direction from the beginning, rather than being presented with decisions already half-made." "A reasonable expectation," my grandmother acknowledged with a slight nod. "Provided you extend the same courtesy to others, including your daughters." My mother's lips tightened momentarily, but she nodded. "Fair enough." She rose again, gathering the folder with deliberate composure. "If that's all for now, we should rejoin our guests. There will be talk if we're absent much longer." As she moved toward the door, she paused beside me. "We should speak privately. Before you leave tomorrow, Olivia, there are things that should be said between us." The invitation, for it was an invitation, not a command, surprised me. "I'd like that," I replied honestly. She nodded once, then left the room with her characteristic grace, offering no clue to any casual observer that her world had just been fundamentally challenged. After she had gone, my father let out a long breath. "Well," he said, "that went better than I expected." "Victoria is many things," my grandmother observed, "but foolish has never been one of them. She recognizes a shifting tide when she sees one." Emma looked at me, her expression a mixture of relief and wariness. "Do you think she'll actually consider the proposal, or is she just regrouping?" "Both," I said with certainty. "She'll evaluate the business case thoroughly, that's who she is, but she'll also be looking for leverage, for ways to maintain her influence and control within whatever new structure emerges." "Naturally," my grandmother agreed, "and we should expect nothing less. Victoria's strategic mind is one of her greatest assets to the family, even when it's challenging to deal with." I nodded, my thoughts already turning to the private conversation my mother had requested for tomorrow. After 7 years of estrangement, after the dramatic revelation of my success, and the even more dramatic proposal to restructure the family business, what exactly did Victoria Parker want to say to the daughter she had once dismissed as the family's black sheep? Whatever it was, I suspected it would be as carefully calculated as everything else my mother did, and potentially just as consequential for the future of both the Parker legacy and my own place within it. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the guest room windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. I had slept surprisingly well considering the emotional intensity of the previous day, the triumphant revelation of my success, the unexpected discovery of allies within my family, and the confrontation that had ended with my mother's guarded but genuine willingness to consider a new path forward. I rose early, drawn to the gardens that had always been my favorite part of the Parker estate. The dew-covered lawns sparkled in the morning light as I followed the familiar stone path to the small Japanese garden tucked away in the property's eastern corner. This secluded spot, with its carefully arranged rocks and meticulously pruned miniature trees, had been my thinking place throughout childhood, a refuge from expectations and judgment. I wasn't entirely surprised to find my mother already there, seated on the stone bench beneath the Japanese maple. She wore a simple cream sweater and tailored slacks, her hair pulled back in a casual ponytail, a striking departure from her usual formal appearance. Without her armor of perfect tailoring and immaculate styling, she looked both more human and somehow more dignified. She glanced up as I approached, neither inviting nor discouraging my presence. I took a seat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. For several minutes, we sat in silence, watching the morning light play across the rippling surface of the small koi pond. The quiet between us felt different than our previous silences, less charged with tension, more contemplative. "I reviewed the proposal," my mother said finally, her voice calm and measured. "The business case is stronger than I initially assumed. Coming from Victoria Parker, this was high praise indeed. There are adjustments I would recommend," she continued, "particularly regarding governance structure and stakeholder protections, but the core concept has merit." I nodded, careful, not to betray too much reaction to this unexpected opening. "I'd be interested in hearing your suggestions. The governance questions are complex, given the different corporate cultures involved." She turned slightly to study my face. "You're surprised I'm taking it seriously." "A little," I admitted. "You seemed quite opposed to the entire concept last night." "I was opposed to being excluded from the development process," she corrected. "The substance of the proposal deserves proper evaluation." This distinction was classic Victoria Parker, redirecting what had appeared to be emotional resistance into a more rational, process-oriented concern. Yet I sensed a genuine shift in her perspective, a willingness to engage that hadn't been present before. "I spoke with your grandmother last night after everyone had retired," she continued. "We had a long, overdue conversation about many things." A faint smile touched her lips. Eleanor has always been remarkably direct when she chooses to be. I could imagine that conversation. Two formidable women, each accustomed to directing rather than being directed, navigating decades of accumulated tensions and unspoken grievances. "What did you talk about?" I asked, genuinely curious. My mother looked back toward the pond. "The nature of legacy, the price of perfectionism, the dangers of confusing control with leadership." She paused. "And the ways in which I may have mishandled your departure." The admission, however, obliquely phrased, was so unexpected that for a moment I couldn't respond. Victoria Parker rarely acknowledged mistakes, and never without careful qualification. She also shared something I hadn't known, my mother added. That she had been following your career from the beginning, that she'd invested in Horizon's initial public offering. A note of hurt crept into her voice despite her evident effort to suppress it. She knew about your success long before yesterday's revelation and chose not to tell me. I hesitated, uncertain how to navigate this unexpected vulnerability. I didn't know she was following my career either, I offered. Not until yesterday. My mother nodded slightly, accepting this. Your grandmother has always had her own agenda, her own methods of influencing family direction. I shouldn't have been surprised. She turned to face me directly. But we didn't come here to discuss Eleanor. You wanted to know why I asked to speak with you privately. Yes, I acknowledged. She took a deep breath, seeming to gather her thoughts. 7 years ago when you left, I told you that you would amount to nothing without this family. The words had been branded into my memory, fueling countless late nights and difficult decisions as I built Horizon from nothing. I was wrong, she said simply. 2 words I had never expected to hear from Victoria Parker's lips. Not, perhaps, I was mistaken, or the circumstances proved different than anticipated. Her usual careful phrasings that acknowledged changed outcomes without admitting error. Just a clean, clear acknowledgement of having been wrong. You've built something remarkable, Olivia, she continued. Something I didn't believe was possible, at least not in the way you envisioned it. That failure of imagination was mine, not yours. I stared at her, searching for the hidden agenda, the subtle manipulation that had always characterized our interactions. But her expression held a straightforward sincerity I had rarely witnessed. Thank you, I said finally. That means more than you might think. Perhaps not, she replied with unexpected insight. I understand better than most how powerful validation can be, especially when it comes from someone who previously withheld it. She looked down at her hands, perfectly manicured as always, but showing the subtle signs of age that she typically disguised with expensive creams and careful presentation. I've spent my life building and protecting a certain vision of what the Parker legacy should be, she said quietly. A vision inherited from your grandfather, refined through decades of careful management and strategic positioning. I believed, truly believed, that deviation from that established path was not just unnecessary, but dangerous. She looked up, meeting my gaze directly. But the world has changed. The financial industry has changed. And perhaps most significantly, my daughters have demonstrated capabilities and vision that I failed to recognize or nurture. The admission seemed to cost her something, a visible release of a closely held self-image that had defined her for decades. I'm not saying I was wrong about everything, she clarified, always careful not to concede more ground than necessary. Tradition and established relationships still have tremendous value. The Parker name still opens doors that would remain closed to those without our history and connections. I never disputed that, I pointed out. I just believed there were other doors worth opening as well. She nodded slowly. Yes, I see that now. A small, rueful smile touched her lips. Perhaps if I had been more willing to explore those other possibilities 7 years ago, we might have avoided the estrangement entirely. The acknowledgement of loss, of 7 years that could have been different, hung in the air between us, both painful and strangely healing in its honesty. We can't change the past, I said after a moment, but we can choose how we move forward. Indeed. She straightened her shoulders slightly, returning to more practical matters. Which brings me to the proposal. If, and I emphasize if, we proceed with this restructuring, there are several conditions I would consider essential. I'm listening, I said, curious about what terms Victoria Parker would set for her cooperation. First, proper governance structures that respect the distinct cultures and operational requirements of each division. Horizon would maintain its technological autonomy. Parker Financial would preserve its client relationships and investment philosophy. Emma's venture operation would continue its focus on emerging opportunities. I nodded. This aligned with my own thinking about how the AI integration should work. Second, a transition period of at least 2 years. during which your father and I would remain actively involved in strategic direction while gradually shifting day-to-day leadership responsibilities. This seemed reasonable as well. Abrupt. Change would risk disrupting valued relationships and institutional knowledge. Third, she continued, her gaze steady, regular family meetings, not just business discussions, but genuine reconnection. Whatever professional structure we create, the foundation must be rebuilt family relationships. Without that, none of the rest will succeed in the long term. This last condition surprised me more than the others. Victoria Parker, the consummate businesswoman, was prioritizing family healing alongside financial considerations. "I'm not suggesting we can erase the past," she added, reading my expression accurately. "The hurt and misunderstandings run too deep for that. But if we're to build something together professionally, we need to commit to working through our personal history as well." It was perhaps the most emotionally honest statement I had ever heard from my mother, an acknowledgement that relationships weren't just background context for business arrangements, but essential foundations that required their own careful attention and repair. "I agree," I said simply. She seemed slightly surprised by my ready acceptance. "You do?" I nodded. "The past 7 years have taught me many things. Among them is that success without meaningful connection has limitations. I built Horizon to prove I could create something significant on my own terms, but the journey was lonelier than it needed to be." My mother's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Loss often teaches us what matters most, doesn't it? Even when that loss is partially self-inflicted. The observation felt like a gentle bridge between us, an acknowledgement that our estrangement had carried costs for both of us, regardless of who bore more responsibility for its inception. "I have a condition of my own," I said after a moment. She raised an eyebrow, waiting. "Honesty," I said simply. "Even when it's uncomfortable, even when it challenges cherished assumptions or established ways of doing things, we need to commit to speaking truth to each other, without the masks and careful performances that characterized so much of our family dynamic in the past." My mother considered this, her expression thoughtful. "Honesty without cruelty? Truth with respect for differing perspectives?" "Yes," I agreed. "Not honesty as a weapon, but as a foundation for genuine understanding and growth." She extended her hand formally. "Then we have the beginning of an agreement." I took her hand, feeling the strange mixture of familiarity and newness in this simple gesture of connection. We weren't erasing the past or pretending that deep differences could be resolved in a single conversation, but we were choosing to create a new chapter together, built on clearer sight and mutual recognition of each other's value and humanity. As we walked back toward the house together, the morning light painting long shadows across the immaculate lawn, I felt a sense of possibility that went beyond business strategies or family politics. The black sheep had not only proven her worth, but had helped create the conditions for a new kind of family narrative, one with room for tradition and innovation, for established wisdom and fresh perspectives, for the strength that comes from honoring the past while boldly reimagining the future. Later that afternoon, as I prepared to leave the Parker estate, my grandmother found me in the solarium, where I had gone to say goodbye to her beloved plants and the peaceful sanctuary they created. "You look different," she observed, studying my face with those perceptive eyes that missed nothing. "More settled somehow." "I had a conversation with Mother this morning," I explained. "A real one, perhaps for the first time." She nodded, unsurprised. "Victoria is capable of remarkable growth when she chooses to be. As are you." She took my hand in her paper-thin but still strong grasp. "What happens next is up to all of you. But the foundation has been laid for something quite extraordinary." "Parker Global Holdings," I mused, the name still feeling foreign on my tongue. "Do you really think it can work? That we can blend such different worlds and approaches?" The most resilient ecosystems are those with the greatest diversity, she replied, gesturing toward her collection of plants from all corners of the world, thriving together despite their different origins and needs. The Parker legacy was never meant to be a monument to the past, but a living, evolving creation that adapts to changing conditions while maintaining its essential strength. As I embraced her before leaving, I felt the wisdom of 90 years. In her frail frame, the perspective that came from seeing beyond immediate conflicts to longer arcs of family and business evolution. In the main hall, Emma waited to walk me to my car. "So," she said with a small smile, "the prodigal daughter returns, turns everything upside down, and leaves all in a single weekend. Typical Olivia efficiency." I laughed, grateful for her lightness after so much emotional intensity. "I'm not really leaving, am I? Not if we move forward with this restructuring." "No," she agreed, her expression turning more serious. "You're not leaving. You're helping us build something new." She hesitated, then added, "I missed you, you know, all these years, even when I was angry at you for walking away." "I missed you too," I admitted, more than I allowed myself to acknowledge. We reached my car, sleek and expensive, a visible symbol of the success I had achieved on my own terms. But suddenly the car seemed less significant than the woman, standing before me, my sister, my unexpected ally, a bridge between the world I had left and the one I might now help create. "I'll call you tomorrow," I promised as we embraced. "We have work to do." "Yes," she agreed with a smile. "We certainly do." As I drove away from the Parker estate, watching it recede in my rearview mirror, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past 24 hours. I had arrived as the black sheep returning in triumph, ready to silence a room with proof of my success. I was leaving as something more complex, still independent, still defined by the path I had forged. On my own, but now connected to a larger possibility that incorporated both my individual achievements and my family's legacy. The net worth statement that had silenced the room had opened a door I hadn't anticipated. Not just a vindication, but to a deeper kind of validation that came from being truly seen and valued for exactly who I was. Sometimes, the greatest success isn't proving others wrong, but creating the conditions for a new kind of right. One that expands possibilities for everyone involved and transforms old narratives into foundations for unexpected growth. The black sheep had not only thrived outside the fold, but had helped redefine what the fold itself could become. And in that redefinition lay the seeds of both personal healing and collective transformation. As I accelerated onto the highway, leaving the past behind but carrying its lessons forward, I smiled at the road ahead, uncertain, challenging, but bright with possibility. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.